forum stage with Sami Haddadin, whom you just heard give a wonderful talk. As a quick reminder, he's the founding director of the Munich School of Robotics and Machine Intelligence at the Technical University Munich. And he's accompanied by our second panelist, who is Maurice Conti. He is Chief Innovative Officer at Telefonica Alpha, a long-term innovation facility working on moonshot projects. We've been hearing about moonshot projects being discussed in Circle. I'm Bert Verberg. I'm Regional Executive Editor for Springer Nature's Berlin office, and welcome again to our forum. So, listening to your talk, Sami, I'd like to ask a first question, and later, of course, we'll take questions from the floor. Sure. The question is maybe somewhat fundamental. How can humans remain in control of the things we've seen?
So I think there's many things we actually have to do in order to always remain under control. Is really to first of all understand the limitations of the systems. So it is always, and this was a little bit my argument about the embodiment, right? So any system can only do the things it can physically do in a way. So it's a bit different compared to the pure data-oriented disembodied AI. So we always have kind of the physical limitations of the system, which we can design as engineers, right? So there's certain things we can build in to really that can never be broken in a way, right? So, for example, mechanical limitations to be safe in interaction, sensory limitations in order to kind of respect your privacy, for example. And there's many of these design goals that we need to fulfill. And I think there is also maybe the most important aspect is as a societal discussion to, for example, explain exactly and reason about what do we want these systems to do and what do we not want them to do, right? So this is a conscious choice of our society. This then, in a direct consequence, in some sense, gives us the right guidelines and technological goals that have to be fulfilled in order to meet these specifications in a way. So I think this is nothing that just an engineer or computer scientist like myself can decide, but this is a societal discourse that is currently taking place, and this is a kind of interaction between the science and technology and the society and the application in order to really fulfill whatever is the right level of control we want to have. At the same time, and this is I think what you're kind of pointing to, we want these systems to be at least partially autonomous to do the things we want them to do in a way, right? So this is a kind of back and forth between the scientific technological progress and always the grounding in, let's say, legal frameworks, ethical discussions. There was this wonderful talk in the morning that really showed the drawbacks we have from this very interconnected and almost unregulated global internet society. And I think right now we can already set the right goals and rules to do this.
Okay, that's very comforting to hear that you're thinking about this aspect. Maurice, do you have anything to say on this topic?
So to begin, it strikes me as maybe ironic that we are talking at the same time about robots that can open locked doors, and humans are eating insect protein.
I had my first locust ever just now. It's great.
Seriously, this is the dystopic science fiction kind of situation, but I actually agree with you, Sami. Even these very sophisticated tools that you're working on are just that, they're tools. And humans fashion tools maybe ultimately in their own image, but if anything were to go wrong at some point in the future, it would be our responsibility. Because the tools don't have their own morals, they don't have their own ethics, they can only express what we imbue into them. So exactly as you say, these are things we need to be thinking about now. These are, as engineers, things that we can design into systems so that they fail safe instead of fail dangerous. It's not something I lose sleep over. Certainly from the technical side, from the engineering side, I don't think that's the dangerous part. As a futurist, the future is actually pretty easy to predict technologically. Very difficult to predict because of the humans. The humans always screw everything up. So pay attention to the humans, those that are making decisions, those in power, That's where the danger lies. They're the ones that will misuse potentially these tools.
Yeah, perhaps I can add one afterthought. Your robot is impressive, but say it's learning how to insert the key in keyhole, and for some reason my hand is nearby while the robot is training, and it experiences my hand as something that's in the way, and it starts to try to kick me away and can wound me. Yeah, so things like these, have they been thought about, and are they included? And can we think far enough in advance about things that can go wrong?
I would argue we have to think that far away. I think this is our obligation as scientists and as technologists to foresee what can go wrong and try as good as we can and as conscious as we can to design the right countermeasures, right? I mean, you talked about fail-safe, right? This is exactly one example. If you give a robot a sense of touch, you also have to give the robot the ability to understand the differences of touch, right? The differences of grasping a fragile object, interacting with a fragile human that might be either kind of physically fragile or just by the location you touch it, and objects where you need a firm grasp, for example, right? So giving these systems the understanding of how to interact with the world, not only to interact with them, and really classify, learn, and also do this in the right manner that is acceptable, which is not a kind of global metric, right? In a way that the same acceptability on your side as mine, we might share certain commonalities, but there's also individual aspects about that. And this is exactly where we are at the moment, right? So it's the first time we give robots the ability to learn physical manipulation, to share that knowledge, to accelerate. And now, how do we really get this contextual information into the system? And this is exactly the roadmaps we are actually working on.
If I may, Sami, I think you say something interesting about being able to give the robot sort of the contextual limits that you want to provide and so forth. The beauty is, say a human being starts to behave badly, it could be very difficult to correct that behavior. Whereas the robot, you just tell it, no, stop that, and it will stop that instantly. So if we change our minds about what the robot wants to do, if the robot starts to do things that we aren't predicting because it's autonomous, that's actually a relatively easily correctable cycle compared to humans or what happens in nature.
Maybe if I can just
Sure.
add one thing, because I guess this is kind of also an argument that I tried to make, which was still in the beginning of argumentation. What I also would like to kind of stimulate a thought is in this whole intense and tense interaction between man and machine, men and machines, humans and machines, is really that we should not think of them being counterparts, but if we think about the extension of tools, and the right design of these tools is essential. And if we think about these robots, these embodied AI, these artificial intelligence systems on its large scale, to be part of our decision-making, action-taking, and interaction, then we can actually use them also in a way to give us abilities we never had before, right? I mean, technology in the right way gives us the abilities we never had without sacrificing the ones that we acquired and that we love to still have, right? And I think it's really important that this kind of understanding between humans and technologies should be a proactive, shaping one in order to determine really what it is we can do with this technology. Because I'm always a bit afraid if you the discussion of keeping technology and research like a box of Pandora that you don't want to open, right? This is a very dangerous thought. I think the contrary should be the case. We should actively explore with the right trust in the people who do it, right? Because we are educated in a system in which our ethics are fundamental. And I think we really need to understand that these new technologies that kind of go beyond what we have seen so far, right? So we are not just anymore classical tools that are passive, but they take action, they take reasoning, they give us recommendations. This is an extension of our own abilities. And I think if we really see it that way, then I guess this is a healthy interpretation of technology, and especially in the age of AI.
Yeah, I agree. Shall we perhaps open up now to questions from the floor? Here's one. I'll give you the mic.
Thank you. You mentioned technology going the right way. We always notice that government regulations and laws does not evolve the same way. What is the measurement or the effort done by scientists to help that the regulations go the same way, to try in certain way to limitate corporation from using those technologies the wrong way?
Yeah, I think you're talking about a very important aspect that I can basically answer for me personally only, of course. So I give you the examples of what am I doing in order to really help do the right decisions. So I myself, despite it's not my main job in a way, right? So I sacrifice my time as a scientist and technologist for advising politicians on Bavarian level, national German level, and also European level to really ground and make them aware of what is the potential, what are the risks, how should we see the right potentials, and how should we be very active in using technology the right way today, but developing also the technology of tomorrow in a way that this gets into legislation and into funding, into technology transfer, into entire society. And I'm being engaged in many of these committees which really give input to legislation, and this is my share in exactly taking this responsibility.
Maurice, how to use technology the right way?
So one of the things I've done on my teams in the past is we have a whole group of people whose job it is to try and predict, try and figure out how things could go wrong. Even with relatively simple projects, I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg did not think that things were going to go as badly as they're going, day one when he was in college. I think he had another mission in mind. And so we have these teams who are trained and who spend their time saying, well, yeah, that's a great idea. I understand you want to bring water to this part of the world or whatever, but here's what could potentially go wrong. And so very early on, we try and predict these possible futures and try and build in either at the engineering level, at the business level, and so forth, ways of trying to avoid that. Our projects all have to have a positive impact on the world, so that's kind of the starting point. But we have to try and predict how things, even with that goodwill, how things could go wrong, and then we bolster against that.
Maybe to even take this one step further, as an engineer speaking now, we use predictive tools a lot to design systems such that they do what we want them to do in a way, right? So we use models, we use understanding of the world, we use understanding of humans in order to foresee that the things we're developing will do years from now what we envisage them to do. So why don't we use, and this is a speculative comment I just want to make, why don't we use technology such as predictive AI, such as intelligent algorithms, to forecast and use this as part of our feedback process? How will that impact our future society? Because many of these questions you're asking, this foresight questions, they are often based on committees, humans. We are not a collective entirely, right? We have different kind of priorities, we have different desires, we have different backgrounds, all kinds of differences that make us non-ideal as a collective in a way. So I think it would be really interesting to also use such technology to improve our own foresight to determine the society we want to live in, right? So make exact this kind of use of technology.
That's AI thinking about AI, yeah?
In a way.
Are there further questions? Yes, please.
Thank you, first of all, for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. Could you name me some applications of full-bodied AIs where they'd be useful?
Yeah. So just to complement what Bart just said, I would say it's humans empowered by AI to think about AI, just to make this a bit more concrete. So the applications for these kind of technologies are manifold, I would say. It's more like an enabler technology. So what is happening right now is that with these kind of systems, you can get into small, medium enterprises, for example. So not only the big companies can now afford and use robots, but now you have robots that are smart tools, so that anyone could use them in a way, right? So that they are becoming a commodity tool, and you don't need to be a super trained expert to then make use of that technology. So this is kind of the professional side, logistics and so on. But I think what is happening now, maybe even more importantly, is that this opened the door towards applications in healthcare, for example, in rehabilitation. Think about applications in elderly care. We had a discussion in the circle yesterday, right? So the results were presented. The aging society is one of our greatest challenges we have to deal with, and we have to find solutions to that. And I think, personally, technology is a fundamental building block that we should develop in the right way so that we can enable the elderly to really live the life they want to live and not govern the life within a higher system that we define the rules of the game. So I think, just to give you one example, in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, which was one of the sites where we connected to, we actually developed robotic systems, humanoids, that are co-designed with the flats, with the apartments of the future. How do they look like together with elderly people, nursing homes, but also medical staff, caretakers, and so on? How do we design these systems such that within a participatory process, elderly people can really feed back with us and give us input into the design of these systems so that they exactly are the right tools given that grand mission in a way, right? And just to give you a hint, there was a movie, Frank and Robot, or Robot and Frank. That's an awesome movie. Just to answer this question a little bit also on the artistic side.
That's a good tip. Maurice, would you like to add on ideas for applications?
I think, referencing in particular the work that you saw in the presentation, this is an unlocking technology, so it affects all of robotics in a way and unlocks certain potential in them. What makes us special and what AI scientists are trying to do is the way we learn is we just have to pay attention to what's going on. You have to remember what happened, and then you have to form a pattern on that in your mind. And that's exactly what those robots are doing. It's interesting that the demo is of robots unlocking a lock, which for you and me is trivial. And I actually, I would take what you were saying about human-machine partnership, and I think that is the right way to think about it. But I think there's a subtlety in terms of how to think about that. And the key, the beauty, the potential beauty of that relationship is where each is doing what the other can't. So you're pairing these two entities together, where together they can do something that neither can do alone. And that's really where you get some magic things happening. So, I certainly appreciate the demo, but these robots that can learn from each other instantaneously, so when one learns, all know, or together they can learn something that one can't learn individually is great. I think the magical applications are going to be the ones where a human would go, that's really hard for me to do, paired with the human next to the robot, where the human is doing things that the robot would have a very difficult time doing, like unlocking the door.
If I may comment on that, in a way, maybe even contradicting in a given context. I hope you excuse me on that. So because I think that there's two things to think about in this situation. Humans can do a hell lot of things. We're basically magical creatures in a way for someone who wants to create embodied artificial intelligence. We do all these marvelous things, and anything I do, I would say humans can do it better. Right? Maybe not the way is as fast as we can do now, but what we do, we always do better. And I just want to give a thought on that, or kind of pinpoint towards the original thought of robotics, coming from the Slavian word of robota, right, which means slave work essentially. Robotics, as the embodiment of AI, has one purpose, and this is relieve us from slave work, right? Not let us do what we can do, because we can do slave work, obviously. No, relieve us from the work that we don't want to do and that probably we should not do. And especially if we think about all these digital devices we have with us, they are produced by manual labor under conditions none of the participants at Falling Walls want to work at. And this is what robotics should solve, right? One of the grand challenges of mankind is to get the same working conditions all over the planet, right? That's a grand challenge of robotics and AI. This is what we should tackle, and this is the challenge that is not necessary in our world, right? So it depends on the context. That's what I'm trying to say here.
There was a question by the lady in front, or not anymore? Yeah.
Okay. So, hi, and thank you very much for your talk early on. My question is that currently AI and robotics, it's kind of used interchangeably oftentimes. but there was robotics before AI, and there was AI independent of robotics. But how much does it really? How much has it influenced each other? And do you think there is possibilities even for robots without AI in the future?
Okay, that's a naming question, I guess. I would rather say I think it's the same thing, and we should. And this was part of my talk. I would actually argue, and I think I'm not alone on that. That there is artificial intelligence. Robotics is to a large extent part of artificial intelligence. There is certain things that are not part of that, and this is the embodied AI side. And then there is the disembodied AI side, right, which is just a sequential, data streaming and processing and having, pipelines. This pipeline kind of AI. So I would argue, as someone who was surprised when he went into research, that robotics community and AI community are not the same. I still remember this really well when I, entered research. I was kind of puzzled by that interpretation. I would even argue that it's not even sure what was there before, because as someone who is from Hanover, where Leibniz was acting most of his time, I think that robotics and AI have multiple fathers and they go far beyond the last century. If you think about Leibniz, who did the binary code, not only, he also did the first calculation machine, right? With the four, Schickard did this too, and he did the four, right? All the four basic operations. And he did it in a mechanical way. So embodiment and computation cannot be, excluded from each other. Any data that exists has to exist. It's embodied somewhere. If we talk about virtual systems and we have a digital device in our hand, that sounds a little like a joke to me, right? I think embodiment and computation, they are the same thing. They are just two different perspectives, and the same holds for AI and robotics to a certain extent, right? And this embodiment question. That's my personal perspective. Yeah. And we don't see robots in the future without AI. I don't see that.
It seems Maurice is agreeing.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Hello. I have a security question. Did you protect the interaction between the different systems we've seen from hackers outside? Because I'm a company, and if I used such robots, I would keep my innovation safe. Yes. I would want to keep my innovation safe.
Are you talking about data protection or physical protection? Are
data protection.
So you're worried that someone would come and...
Communication between...
yeah. Well, that's a specific... You might want to get that one. But.
So I'm not a security expert, to be frank. But I care a lot about that as a naive expert on that level. So I collaborate with the right expert, let's put it that way. And I'm very much interested in understanding, that's the next question I'm asking in a way, what happens if there's false information? What happens if someone is listening? What happens, all these what happens if questions are what puzzle me at the moment. And I'm trying to understand, can we use the collective not only to share knowledge and accelerate, what I was saying was this collective accelerates knowledge orders of magnitude. This might even give us potential to also detect such attacks in orders of magnitude faster. I don't know. So, there seems to me potential to make these systems more resilient, safer than any systems before that just peer-to-peer, for example. But that's just a research question. I'm very much interested in this particular example. They are, in fact, within 1 VPN. So, yes.
The gentleman.
I really enjoyed your talks. And my question is that, there's a novel of J.G. Wells, like Time Machine. And so you just said, robot is to free us from slavery work. But what is the slavery work? So from my experience, we have Japanese characters. And, I learned a lot in the school ages. But, after I started using computers, I can't write Japanese characters anymore. So we lose some ability. So it's very important to think about what ability we need to maintain or keep, and this also matters for the culture itself. So I would like to have your opinions about this.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and certainly my spelling is worse now than it was 20 years ago. I've literally gotten lost walking out of a building and sort of because the GPS was bad and sort of going in circles. So I think culturally we ablate certain skills while we take new ones on. I would chalk part of that up to cultural evolution. Some of it goes in a desirable direction, some of it doesn't. You also have some agency over that. It's your choice that you're not spending your weekends practicing your kanji and your calligraphy, right? So the challenge may be that the technology obviously evolves much faster than we do. Certainly biologically way faster. Culturally also faster. It takes us probably 3 generations to adopt to any of these things, and the technology can change within half a generation or less. So a challenge, but I actually don't see it as such a dystopic thing. I think we do have agency, and in the end, it's progress. We will change.
Thanks.
So maybe to also, so I fully agree. That makes so much sense to me because I think we want to have progress. We want to evolve in a way, right? The question is, what is evolution? But I would argue that this might be a different question than the one that you're asking in a way because you're asking 2 questions at the same time. I think this is what you're doing. So the slave work seems to me something that, and this is a simple word for a very complex situation we have in our global society, right? But I think I like to think that certain things are undebatable. Kids producing probably 90% of the clothes that is being worn here is something we should get rid of, I think, right? If this is something we don't agree, then I would say our society has a problem. It's a little bit like the awareness question we have, right? With food waste, with the way that we use plastic, the direct linkage of our actions with the consequences. And how can we change and alter that? And this is what I'm trying to say. And the same applies for, as I said, all these digital devices that are being produced in manufacturing sites that none of us would like to work in, right? And using technology to solve problems of our kind, of our times, is something wonderful. At the same time, I just want to emphasize something you said. Humans learn through practice. If we don't practice, we basically, So that's, I think, what you're trying to say. Yeah.
Could we perhaps dwell a little bit more on this? Let's be futurists. What will robots do exactly in the future? What will be there left to do for humans? And probably in 5 years from now or 10 years we will, but short to mid-term future, what do you think?
So I think 5 years is a very short time. I think 5 years from now will look pretty much just the way it does today with small changes here and there. In a deeper future, a couple of things. So one thing is, as soon as robots become useful, people stop calling them robots. So your dishwasher is a robot. No one calls it a robot. And so we'll start to be adopting these robots into our daily lives and kind of not really notice. I've been thinking about futures for a long time, and the future is something that seems like it's going to happen overnight, and then it happens over the course of a decade. And when it does, no one really cares. So in the 50s, everyone was amazed that we were going to have video telephones and we'd be able to make phone calls across the world. All of you have that capability in your pocket right now, and you probably don't care at all. And so I think that's, to answer more specifically, the robots that we're going to see in our lives are going to be important, certainly, but you sort of won't realize. The quality of the car you drive is much higher than it was 30 years ago, mostly because of automation in factories. But you don't care about those robots. You just care that your car lasts longer or it's quieter when you're driving down the street because everything is really tight. So I think it's hard and maybe less interesting to ask that particular question, which is what's going to happen with these specific machines, but rather what are these machines being deployed going to enable in our lives? And I think that is higher quality. I think the issues you're talking about, Sami, are really sticky ones. You know, you say, do I want? Am I happy that kids are making my clothes? I actually don't know, because maybe the alternative is that if they didn't have that job, which is not a great job, they wouldn't eat. And so then it becomes a meta problem. I mean, it's a sticky situation. So I'm meandering a bit. So I'll stop and you go.
No, I think this was a great direction to think of, right? And I also like the idea that you take the perspective of the human. How do we want it to be, right? We're always I have the impression we're discussing like the future is something that is detached from our choices, right? It's not just coming. I mean, we as a community decide how this future will look like, and we need to engage. We need to we need to be empowered, that's one thing, but we also need to actively engage. And if we don't actively engage and shape, then the future may feel passive in a way, but then it's our own fault in a way. So if we think about there's lots of discussion on this human-centeredness, right? What does this mean? So when I designed these robots, more than 10 years ago, I was starting to think, okay, based on my basic research, how with these abilities, what can I do to serve a need? That was the question, the first question I asked. And then this was the result. And I mean, my future back then, 10 years, this is a 10 years question I can answer retrospectively, was in 10 years, I still have a picture that looks exactly like that robot and the abilities it has. And I just was really going towards that, you could call it mission in a way, but I had to unfortunately answer many science questions and research questions to be able to do that. So if I wouldn't have made that conscious choice to solve a specific problem, I would have done something else. The future would have been different. That's my answer to that.
I will say one opportunity that I think we have today is when engineers and scientists are envisioning this future and embarking on that mission to realize that vision, an opportunity that we have is to involve others in that journey. Do you have an ethicist from the ethics department in the university sitting next to you? Do you have a designer? Do you have an artist? Do you have a musician? And in my work, that's actually what we've done. We put these crazy teams together where you literally have a visual artist sitting next to a physicist, and they, embark on a project. And what you get out of these hybrid, strange, multidisciplinary teams, I think ends up being more humanistic than a pure engineering drive.
A question over there.
Hi, I have a question going back to the collective learning. So what have been some of the challenges? How do you see in the future these could be, like, are we expecting to see collective learning from robots that are already in place, or is this something that is just going to be like for the learning, and when they go out in the street they're not longer learning? And how will you deal with like sensitive data and all these challenges that you might face?
That's a very, very difficult question in a way to answer that needs lots of hours of discussion instead of answers from me. But let me try I will try to do it very short. No, this is something like a mechanism to do lifelong learning and reduce the time of learning of systems to an amount that they get useful. I mean, we always, in manufacturing, people always talk about lot size 1. How do you want to produce lot size 1 if you need to reprogram and teach your system for 6 months? Then the order is gone, right? In a practical reason. So these systems have to be operational like that. They need to be able to learn all the time, to adapt to the new conditions and to be interconnected. And this collective makes this accelerated such that it gets useful. At the same time, that's the second part of my answer, is this seems to be an effect that I hypothesize to be universal. So we could now start thinking, how do we exploit collectivity? That relates to your question with the security issue. How can we exploit this system property of collectivity in a way that we make systems more capable on the one side, but also safer? So that might be a potential to make them safer. It is a threat at the same time, or it's an intrusion, it's an intrusive door that has been opened. But at the same time, it might be a more resilient system that we can design. So this still has to be explored.
Can I add, because it was said this is about collective learning. Yeah, we saw the robots one or many teach each other, and then in the end, what they all can do is put the key in the lock. But what about collective execution? Are there also scenarios where they have learned things and now they can do a complex task where indeed you need more than one robot to accomplish?
The answer is simple and yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And one thing I even forgot in my talk, I'm so sorry that I forgot that. That was not just one key it learned. Actually, the collective did different keys. I totally forgot to say that. Actually, the key here in Berlin was a different key than all the others that you saw.
Okay. Let's stretch the time a little bit and go for your question.
Thank you. This is more of a funny question. Do you expect, like, if we fast forward 100 years from now, do you expect a robot replacing researchers and
yes and no, but I will go back to this position I have around augmentation. Maybe that robot in 100 years could outperform our friend Sami. But what that robot for sure would not outperform is a team between it and future Sami. So if the robot's capabilities keep going up to eclipse today's humans' capabilities, in a way it doesn't matter in this particular question, because the future research team will be a robot and a human. We're already seeing that in chess, right? We're already seeing that in Go. Every time an AI sort of reaches peak, the next day, it's a team of a human and that AI beat everybody.
I'm getting a persistent look from the lady over there. We really have to stop. So thank you all for coming and listening, and thank you very much to Sami and Maurice.
Thank you
Let's
all.
give them an applause.
Thank you.